The corner of filament, the corner of fun, the filament corner. Hello everybody, this is the filament corner, the corner of filament, the corner of fun, and it's been a little bit since I've uploaded a video. The last one was on the Startt printer, unboxing it, and as you can see, it is assembled. Now, I originally started assembling this kit in January, and it wasn't until late February that I actually got it printing, and I will go further into detail over that. But right now, let's just go over the basics. It's an acrylic printer, as you can see. It does have injection molded parts, however, I did find out in the manual that they were originally 3D printed. It has this weird build surface on top of a piece of acrylic as your bed, and you have two clips to hold it down. And other than that, I mean, it's got two Z-axes with two lead screws and plenty of linear rods and a Bowden extruder. On the side we have our Metzi board, and that's really about it on it. It's just like almost every other Perusa style 3D printer. Now, some of the interesting things to note during actually putting this thing together. First off, I ran into some things that I don't like. Now, the first thing is actually the axis switch for the bed.
Let me zoom in on it.
If you can zoom in on it, go on ahead. But this little axis switch here,
okay, I don't have to zoom in.
it is pressed right up against this piece of acrylic, and the way that it's attached to the wire, it has the metal connectors like that, and they butt into this piece quite tightly. So that was the first thing that I didn't care too much for. I mean, it still works, but it's a tight fit, and you may think that you're going to break something.
Sorry about the camera, people.
Because of how tight of a fit it is. Now, one of the second things is actually the components. Now, I went to assembling this X-axis, the X gantry, and in the pictures it shows a 3D printed mounting system instead of a molded mounting system like you see here. But one thing that it did show is that these rods on the side go all the way in, so there's no rod sticking out. Now, I tried to push these rods in, and I couldn't get them in no more. I was worried about breaking this molded plastic, trying to get them in more. So I believe that's something that they might want to update or look into, because if you're sitting there looking at the picture of the rods flush with this piece right here, and yours aren't flush, you may try to push them in and then break this piece. I gave up while I was ahead. Now, the belts, I'm not sure on the belts. I think that the belts are just this sort of rubbery plastic. I don't think they're reinforced.
You want me to show?
They have the look of not being reinforced, but I could be wrong. I'm not a belt expert. But if they are not reinforced, that does mean every time they will stretch out. So you'd rather have reinforced belts. But that's one that I'm not sure on it. This belt just has the look of non-reinforced.
Let's see. Okay, I zoomed in on it.
Now, this down here. So here, most of the screws were actually laid out into actual baggies that were labeled, and I did get extras. I got quite a few extra little bits and pieces, and so here's all my extras. I even have a little leveling wheel down here for the bed. They even sent an extra one of those and an extra spring. So yeah, there's all the extra components that I have left after this build. Now, I just used the guide, which is quite a lengthy guide. If I take away that right there. Let's see. Yep, here we go. So, there's your guide.
Quite a stack.
For this printer. That's quite a few pages. And they do include a video series, but I just use this, and it's actually a pretty good guide. It is mostly outdated. So, you know, for the most part, you can look at this guide, and it's you know, one thing that wasn't updated was that these parts are now molded. But for the most part, it is up to date as far as I can tell. So besides it being mostly updated and having only a few things that I didn't care too much about, there's not really too much to say about it. Now, here we go. So, that shows 3D printed components on that page.
Okay. Getting as good as I can get it.
So now that does answer the question I had whenever I was unboxing this, which was, are there 3D printed components, and if so, can we get the actual STL files for those components on your USB drive that you get with the printer? I've asked this about many printers. I like the idea that even if this printer couldn't replicate these pieces, I could attempt to take the file and get replacement pieces printed. So, I like the idea of that. Now, of course, they didn't provide them. But hey, if they're watching, maybe they'll provide those files in the future. That's the hope. Now, another thing to note, and this actually would have been one of the things to kill the build, and that is actually, well, this piece right here. This piece may not look like much. You can see it's quite thick. It's actually a bit thicker than the other pieces of acrylic in this kit. But this is a limit switch holder, and it goes down here. It goes on these down parts. It's actually for the Z-axis, and let's see. They've got a hole on both sides for them, so I can actually do that right there, and you can get a good idea on how it works if you can see that right there.
Okay.
So there's an idea. But the problem is that this part is too thick, but at the same time it's not thick enough. I'm sure you understand the irony in what I just said. It's kind of like an oxymoron. But basically, the limit switches all take tiny screws, and I mean tiny screws. I actually have a couple extras that I can show you. That little
Let's see if I can zoom in on it.
bitty screw is what holds
That's tiny.
your limit switches onto this printer. Now, I did say these are tiny. Now, don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty certain these are M2s. I could be wrong, but most of this kit uses M3s or M4s. That's smaller than an M3, so it may be an M2. It's not the most easiest thing to judge right off the bat. But luckily, see, this is why I like this kit. Look at that. They show what screws are in it. So yeah, it's an M2. But like that says, it's only 20 millimeters long. Now, can you guess how thick this block is with a limit switch on it? With those screws going through the limit switch and into this block? It's pretty dang close to 20 millimeters. Can you imagine that? So, comes to my surprise, I try to attach the limit switch onto this, and I can't get the screws to attach. Because the screws are not long enough, and this is just acrylic that's been cut, and because it's been, just cut with a laser, they couldn't actually make an internal cavity where the nut could go up in there. So they needed to include longer screws for these kinds of pieces, but they didn't. And that would have been the first thing to kill this build if I didn't have the ability to print a replacement and the ability to make a replacement. Now, keep in mind what I said earlier about this part, because here was my first test print on trying to replace that part. Now remember, I said that this part is a bit thicker than all the other acrylic, and that with the limit switch it was too thick for the screws. My assumption was that, the piece is too thick. Let me scale it down to around the width of this other acrylic, and it should work. The screws will be able to go through to the nut, and all will be fine and dandy. No. Oh, the cruel irony is that, yes, you do need a thick piece. In fact, it would actually be better if this was a bit thicker. So, with that said, I had to go back to the drawing board and basically create a piece that was thin like this, where it hooked onto the side and where it screwed into the frame. So that way it's screwed in properly, because they cut these holes for this width of acrylic. And then I had to have it just expand out and get wider to where my limit switch was going to be laying down. And it's right here, actually. Now, instead of buying new screws, I created my part where it has a back cavity that is wider than the nut. So that way the nut can go into that cavity up to a certain point and cinch down on the plastic. Essentially, you get the width of this in terms of where you're actually cinching down at, but you get the thickness that you need for this to hit the limit switch. And I actually found that the limit switch on this had the possibility of just moving over a little bit and not properly triggering on this thickness. So I made mine a little bit thicker whenever I printed it out. Now, I don't expect everybody to have a 3D printer or the skills to create a part they need. So for most people, the quicker and easier option would be to just go and buy longer hardware. But at the end of the day, they should include longer screws. This should be on them, not the buyer of the kit. The fact that it was placed on me, well, that kind of sucks. Because what if I wasn't here and this was given to the child and nobody knew how to properly put together a kit, how to properly put together a 3D printer, and then they run into that problem? That is a roadblock and a half right there. Now remember, I said that could have been what caused it not to be put together. So let's get on to some of the other issues I had. You get what you paid for. In terms of component quality, as I was assembling this along with the Z here, these bearings started to lose their balls. And if I remove this rod, there's a good chance all the balls in this bearing will fall out. It's already lost 2. I've put together kits before. I've taken apart these linear rails and put them back together without the balls falling out of all the bearings. I service my one-how all the time and it uses linear bearings. So the fact that they started falling out that quickly, well, it makes me think that the quality of the components is not that great. And the fact that they are essentially, it appears to be press fit into this, may make them hard to remove and change. So, yeah. You get what you paid for there. Now, what actually halted this from being a printable printer out of the box and assembled was actually an error that happened whenever I first heated the printer up. Now, I'm used to getting DEF errors related to thermistors. Well, I got a DEC error on this printer whenever I tried to heat it up. And I kept getting it wouldn't heat up. Well, we decided to contact the iMaker team, and let's just say it took a while, and persistence had to be had. I had to email them most of the time twice.
You had to, when we emailed them, we didn't get no response. Then when you emailed them, because he speaks 3D printing language that we don't.
I was able to easily
Yes.
tell him what I thought the root problem was and what parts I needed to replace it. Which not everybody's going to know, especially if you're marketing this towards 3D printer newbies. The name of the printer is Startt.
Mm-hmm. I assume for a child, that's why
And
she got it.
they do have pictures on the front of children putting it together. So yeah, the fact that I had to be persistent, and it did take a while, like I said, started in January, got the replacement parts come in the mail on February 20th. That's a good bit of time, and I had to be persistent throughout that time. Now, at least they did send the parts.
Yeah, they did send them.
Some companies, you'll never hear from them again. They've
Yeah.
gotten your money.
Yeah.
They did respond. But I had to be persistent. I had to keep bugging them.
Yeah.
To get anywhere. So they could step up a little bit on their response time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that was what was keeping the printer from printing. And after we got that fixed, I was able to print on it. And it prints alright. It definitely needs fine tuning to be a really good printer. But, you know, they're advertising it on the cheap. So, the fact that it prints, you know, is one thing. Now, another thing I don't like, and I'm throwing this out for most of the printers within the spectrum, they don't have a power switch on them. This one doesn't either. Now, you don't have to wire any mains, but you do have to plug it up anytime you want to run it, and then you have to unplug it whenever you want to cut it off. I don't like that. I think it'd be nice if they threw in a switch and updated the manual, so that way you didn't have to unplug it and you could toggle it off and on. That's just my little suggestion of adding to it. Now I've kind of told what I didn't like too much about it, and a little bit about what I did like. I did like the manual. It was pretty dang up to date for the most part. There's a couple of things. A couple of the cables, they had different names for them than what's on them now, but they are all labeled now, so that helps a lot with wiring. And they tell you, oh, you're running a wire from the extruder, but they call it C instead of E. Well, you already know where the motor is, you know what wire's coming off of it. You can, for the most part, because it's got this label, you can figure out, you know, oh, this goes into X, and this goes to E, and this goes to Y, and these two go to Z. And as long as you know the basics, which for the most part it'll tell you these two are Z. For the extruder, I'm pretty certain it does say C in the manual that we have, but you know, you see this and you kind of go, oh, I know what that is, I've got one of those, you know. It's not like they all look exactly the same. Now, another thing that actually surprised me was just how stable this frame was. Now, I harp on about not liking acrylic all the time. I just don't care too much for it, but this frame is pretty stable to be made almost completely out of acrylic. It does have some wobble, and I have been thinking of ways of bracing that out of it. But I mean, you know, I'm not pushing it over or pulling it back, it's moving the whole printer. I mean, so that's pretty rigid. That's more rigid than I expected. And other than that, it is what it is. It's a $100 printer that you may have to pay more for shipping. One last thing, and this is mainly to the iMaker team. Don't stick all your rods together. Please don't do that. I don't know what rods you're using. How do I know that these are really hard material, like chrome? I don't. And you're sticking these with these and with the threaded rod down here on the Y. They just stick them all together bundled. Don't do that, guys. Come on. Coming in from shipping, it gets bumps and bangs, and then you have threaded rod rubbing against a different thread down here. You know, you have this lead screw pitch being affected by this threaded rod pitch and vice versa. And then got these smooth rods smack dab in the middle that could get scrapes and dents in them, affecting how your bearings roll on them. So that's mainly just to iMaker in the hopes that they will separate their rods a little bit more than just lumping them all together. So yeah, hopefully we got a couple of test prints floating around here. I'll see if I can send the minion to go find them. I printed out an avocado boat, which may not be here now.
No, your sister done took it.
That's alright. The test print on this printer was an elephant.
Wait a minute. I got one. I got the first one.
Oh, that's a good reminder. The advertised build area on this printer is not the actual print area. This boat can give you a good example of that. This poor avocado boat that's got a smashed hole. Look at the front of that. It's not supposed to be flat like that.
Now, I've actually got one over here that you printed on that one if you want to show it.
Not supposed to be flat like this. That is because the Y travel on this printer is not what it was advertised as, because I set up the slicer profile with what they advertised this printer as having, which it was not on the Y, because this was sitting center and too far. I actually believe it's around 110 on the X on this one. I went back into the slicer and reset it according to what values this has on it. The actual printer. So yeah, there's what the front should look like. It shouldn't be smashed up like that. But I mean, other than that, that's a print. It's a alright print. I mean, it needs adjustments, but it is a print.
I'm still going to use it.
So,
I wonder if she can find the elephant.
now, this isn't the only printer that does the build height, I would say. What would be the good word? Stretching, yes, literally stretching. The one-how printers are very well known for this, because people go, oh, 180 on the build height. Let me print this 180 millimeter object, and then chaos ensues, because that whole gantry starts rubbing on that top sheet metal lip, cutting cables, cutting filament. Bad time for all. So yeah, this is not the only company that does that. I just wish they would change, but they got to be the biggest, or they got to have the most, or the most round numbers. So yeah, be careful on that. Adjust, according to what the machine's in stock, what it says whenever it reaches the end of its journey down the axes. So overall, I don't recommend kits for beginners. So to say that I would recommend this to a beginner, no.
No,
But
he don't.
Go on.
He didn't recommend it to us, actually, to get for the gift.
I don't like to recommend kits in general for beginners. The one-how clones, monoprice, same printer rebranded, is a mostly assembled printer that you only have to put 4 screws in. And I saw a classroom down at the college that I go to mess that up. They didn't put it together right. 4 screws. You go, oh, how could you mess that up? Well, yeah, you can mess that up, even on a printer like that. Now just imagine having all the parts separated and having to put them together. chaos can ensue, and it will ensue if it can. So, the manual is pretty decent, but I don't recommend kits. And even then, this one, I mean, they do have customer service.
But when we wrote them, we didn't get a response. We had to get him. He had to take time out to write them, and once he wrote them and talked in the term, which if he didn't have the experience with 3D printers that he has, we would have been in for it with this printer. It still wouldn't be working because we don't know all that he knows, basically.
And they never did respond about the terrible bearings and
No, they didn't.
the Z limit switch. So
Yeah.
they only responded about that,
Yeah.
and that's just because we kept bugging them about it.
And
so,
we did send pictures of it.
So I don't really recommend this printer, especially for the price.
Mm-hmm.
There's the race to the bottom. There's plenty of bad printers, but there's some gems out there too. And I mean, you just spend a little bit more, which wouldn't have been a little bit more for us because we had to eat shipping to get this here.
Yeah, we didn't know that either, though.
But I think that this is, it's the cheapest. But do you really want the cheapest? So, anyways, thanks for watching. If you think I sound a little bit biased about this, I mean, you did get to hear about my experience with this printer. So, maybe I am biased. But hey, if it keeps you from getting into the same predicament I was in, maybe that was worth it. So yeah, I mean, I'm not going to abandon this printer. I do plan on doing some stabilization stuff to it and stuff. So,
Puppy.
with that said, keep on watching. I'll keep on making when I can.